Hi, I'm Ryan Szymanski, curator for Battleship New Jersey Museum and Memorial. Easily, the most iconic shot of the battleships is that picture you get from the bow looking up at the guns. The problem is, these guns are solid steel. They're not climate controlled in any way. So throughout the day, they are being heated up by the sun, it gets cool overnight, you've got different seasons. So these things are heating up and cooling down, and they're expanding and contracting the metal, which causes the paint to pop off. So that is my extremely long-winded way of saying that to make the ship look good for all the pictures we have to repaint the gun barrels. So we're in the process of that. For turret 1, we just set a scaffolding up on the main deck. The wind we get here on the Delaware River is pretty consistent and pretty bad, which you can probably hear in the audio of this video. You can certainly see it in my hair. I look like Fabio right now, don't I? So being up 3 stories in scaffolding, not the greatest thing. We did that for the main deck, but for here on turret 2, we didn't want to be a story and a half on top of the turret and then set up some scaffolding, and there isn't really a whole lot to tie off to on the turret. So again, long story short, we decided it would be easiest to depress the barrels. When the museum got the ship, the barrels on all 3 turrets were at 0 degrees elevation, which is what these barrels are at right now. We have since gone through and manually elevated the barrels to 20 degrees. Our volunteers did this work. Some of them had shipyard experience from the Philadelphia Navy Yard and other places that worked on Iowa-class battleships. Most recently, 2 of our volunteers, Ken and Dan, have taken the lead on being our gun crew and working on these things. And to see the work that we did, check the link in the description below for the video where we raised the barrels of turret 3 from 5 degrees to the same 20 degrees that turret 1 and 2 are normally at. So since we'd already done the work on 1 and 2 to make them manually movable, we started dropping the barrels here so we can paint them. And just for a sense of reference, you can see that left barrel is still raised to 20 degrees, whereas center and right barrel are both down at 0 degrees. Turret 2 can only depress to 0 degrees. Notice we are, the height of my knee above the deck here. We try to depress any lower and we're hitting the roof of turret number 1. As it is, this barrel cannot clear the periscope, or can barely clear the periscope here that the gun captain uses inside the turret. So you can't go any lower with these barrels. Turrets 1 and 3 can both depress to -2 degrees. They're both a little bit higher up above the deck because of their barbettes, which means that they can be depressed low enough that the gun crews can clean them out and do work on the ends of the muzzles of the barrels. So the different turrets have different angles that they can lower to, just because of how much height they have. It is very uncommon for the guns to go to 0 degrees like they are now. That is more of a thing to do in cleaning rather than there is something point blank to fire at. Point blank range for a battleship is 5 miles. And at that range, the elevation is still something like 2 degrees, positive 2 degrees. Somebody asked me what the calculations were to, if we fired the guns at their minimum, what would be the range? And the Navy's existing range charts that I've seen don't even go down that low, because you're not supposed to. You shouldn't be engaging targets with the big guns that are that close. I can only think of a handful of engagements in history where this comes up. For example, the destroyer Sterret during the naval battle off Guadalcanal, fighting, I think it's the Japanese battleship Hiei. I think some of the German ships might have gotten close with, was it HMS Glowworm got in real close with, it might have been Scharnhorst and Gneisenau, or maybe one of the cruisers. So it's a relatively rare thing that you get in that close, and you've got the secondary battery for that. Knife fighting range, close range for battleship is 5 miles. So, in combat, 5 degrees is your normal, the level you would depress to. In fact, after you've fired the guns at whatever angle you're looking at, they will go back to 5 degrees because that's the loading angle. And that 5 degrees also gives them enough clearance above all the various deck fittings that you have. And while we're on the topic of talking about the gun barrel elevations and rotating, realistically, I suspect the guns would never be rotated unless they were at 5 degrees or more. And there is something called locking your horns, which can happen with turrets 1 and 2, that cause the Navy to set up a doctrine for how these guns are rotated. Locking your horns would be when the barrels of, say, turret 1 is turned off to starboard and they're elevated, and you try to turn turret 2. Now maybe turret 2 is still loading and their guns are still at 5 degrees, so when they turn, their barrels are locking with the barrels of turret 1. And there's a couple different ways with the guns slewing around that this can happen, and that is terrible for your gun barrels. You probably aren't going to damage your barrels themselves, but the bearings and the elevating mechanisms for these guns get all messed up. I'm fairly certain that that happened on New Jersey and that they had to replace some of the bearings for some of the barrels in order for this doctrine to have been put into place. So, this ship had a specific doctrine that if the guns are, let's say they're on the port broadside and we want to rotate to the starboard broadside, turret 1 would rotate first from port to center line. Then turret 2 would rotate from the port side over center line and all the way to the starboard side. Then turret 1 would turn to starboard. We've already talked in other videos about the stops which will prevent the barrels from slamming into the superstructure. And of course, turret 3 doesn't have any issues like this because she's the only turret back aft. However, if you're thinking about Montana-class battleships, or say the older Colorados, Tennessees, Pennsylvanias, all the other 4-gun American battleships, they would have had these issues and these similar doctrines, and likely also the same where the main guns, the main deck guns can depress a little bit further than the super firing guns. So that is one of our recent maintenance projects, and all the things you never thought about in doctrine for elevating and depressing the ship's guns. Any more questions about the guns? Let us know in the comment section down below. Battleship New Jersey receives operating support from the New Jersey Department of State, also from a number of other businesses and private individuals like yourselves. We really appreciate your support. It allows us to do cool videos like this. You can also support us by liking, sharing, subscribing so more people find about the museum and our channel. Thanks for watching.